G'day viewers. So this is something that Corey has been pestering me about for probably a year or so, finally getting around to doing these videos. And it's a explanation of what Silver is talking about in Brief Instructions Chapter 4, point 18, and also point 20, which is basically the same thing. So I think we can all agree that it's really important to go back to the original sources when we are interpreting historical swordsmanship. So let's look at the original source. So I hope that has cleared things up. Thanks for watching. No, only joking. But the point I'm trying to make by showing you that is that Brief Instructions is not a finished fencing manual, okay? It's not meant to be read, let alone published in its current form. It is a first draft stream of consciousness thing from a probably frustrated and angry Silver trying to get ideas down on paper, okay? I'm not saying it's without particular thought or merit. He's organised it in a certain sort of way, but if it had been planned and edited in any way, we wouldn't have both these paragraphs because they're saying pretty much the same thing. So if your interpretation of Silver rests upon looking at the minutiae of the exact word in the exact order it happens to appear in any given bit of illegible scrawl, then you're reading it wrong, okay? When you read Silver, it's about the vibe of the whole thing.
What section of the Constitution has been breached?
Section? What section? There is no one section. It's just the vibe of the thing.
So with that in mind, what is it that these two points are trying to tell us? So let's start with point number 20, which says, if he lie variable after the manner of the passata, then if you lie aloft, as is above said, you have the advantage, because he that lieth variable cannot reach home at head, hand, or arm without putting in his foot or feet, and therefore it cannot be denied but that he that playeth aloft hath still the time of the hand to the time of the foot, which fight being truly handled is advantage invincible. Now quite obviously, if you read that literally, it's nonsense. If I'm close enough to strike my opponent on the head and they're in passata, they are close enough to stab me. Both actions take just the time of the hand, they have the same reach, and I have no advantage whatsoever over the person in passata, so that's nonsense. So why does Silver insist that the person who lies aloft has the advantage over the person in passata? Well, it's this. If I'm lying with my sword above my head, it can come down at any angle in a straight line. However, the person in passata has a problem. If I am over to their left-hand side, they must reach across their own body in order to reach me, which foreshortens their reach, which means that if I can get a couple of feet around to my right, that is their left, that leaves me advantage because I'm then in a place where I can strike them in time of the hand and they cannot reach me. So the actual technique Silver is trying to describe is this. I make a short little triangle step, jumping out to the right, and when I get there, I can drop my sword down in time of the hand, and my opponent won't be able to reach me without putting in a foot because their reach is now foreshortened. They would have to reach across their own body to reach me, and that's going to be too late. Now let's look at point 18. This says, also, if he charge you upon his staccato or any other lying after that fashion, with his point low and large paced, then lie you aloft with your hand and hilt above your head, either true guarded or upon the open fight. Then he cannot reach you if you keep your distance without putting in his foot or feet, but you may reach him with the time of your hand, or with the time of your hand and body, or of hand, body, and foot, because he hath already put in his body within your reach, and have gained you the place, and you are at liberty and without his reach, till he put in his foot or feet, which time is too long to answer the time of your hand, and his place too wide in that place to make a ward in due time to defend his head, arm and hand, one of which will be always within your reach. Note still, this is actually a marginalia thing here. He adds in a little note on the side which says, note still, in this that your weapons be both short, of the equal and convenient length of the short sword. So Silver is basically saying the technique will work against Staccato as well. Again, if I just stand in front of him, we have the same reach, and I have no advantage. However, there is enough foreshortening that if I jump around to the right with my triangle step, I can deliver a cut in time of the hand while remaining out of my opponent's reach. So the technique will still work against somebody in Staccato. But Silver gives us a few extra things to think about here as well. So first of all, there's the warning note in the margin, which is that it will only work if you both have swords of about the same length. Because really we're talking just a matter of inches here, okay? So if you are outreached by your opponent because they're taller than you and have a longer sword, then the technique is simply not going to work. The foreshortening is not nearly enough for you to get away with it. You've both got to have swords of about the same length. Otherwise, you will die. The other thing Silver says here is that you can do it in time of the hand or time of your hand and body, or of hand, body and foot. So why is he saying this? He's saying this because it doesn't matter. What he's trying to tell us is it doesn't matter in which order things move in this particular case. Normally, it's really important. But in this particular instance, it doesn't matter if you move your sword first, or halfway through the attack, or right at the very end, because you're at no stage within your opponent's reach. So the normal rules that apply, that is, move your sword first, don't apply because essentially you're out of distance for the entire time. Now, obviously, the advantage of delaying the hand motion is one of surprise. Your opponent has less time to respond to the attack. But by telling us this, Silver is saying it doesn't really matter at what stage you start moving your hand. It all takes the same amount of time. And that's an important thing to note. In terms of absolute fractions of a second, from the start of the movement to the point where you hit your opponent in the head with the sword, it takes the same amount of time, regardless of which order you move your weapon and body and feet in. And that's important to note because it means it's not an invincible technique. Okay, if the other person has seen it before and they know what's happening, they have exactly the same amount of time to avoid it as they would regardless of whether you move your hand first or last. The other thing that's important to note here is that Silver is describing the staccato guard in a very specific manner. That is, you're quite square on, your left hand is forward, your right hand is pulled right back by your right hip, and really that's why the technique works. It's because the guard is held in this very specific way. Why is he describing a guard like this? Well, possibly because that's pretty well what Saviolo's second guard looks like. Silver was writing a direct criticism of Saviolo, so maybe he just wanted to include techniques that you can use to kill people who have trained with Saviolo. Whether Silver would ever have actually used staccato, I sometimes wonder, because we all tend to use forehand guard inside and outside and don't like this at all. But regardless of that, the point is that if your opponent is standing in a different type of staccato guard, more typical of, say, later Italian rapier, where you're more side on to your opponent and your sword is actually in front of you, then this technique doesn't work. You are no longer foreshortening your reach across your body, and it's not possible for somebody to just jump out to the side and remain out of reach of the defender's sword. So this is a very specific technique that is used in a very specific circumstance against a very specific guard, and cannot be generalized to any other circumstance other than the one that silver gives it. It's not a general principle, it is an exception to the general principles. So there you have it. That is what silver is talking about in points 18 and 20. And the real thing about it is that the whole reason silver specifies this particular technique, and it happens to do so twice, is because it is an exception to the normal rule. It's not what you normally do. It is a very special circumstance in which you can do this one thing that you can't do in any other circumstance. Okay, it's not a central part of the system. And honestly, it's not even a high percentage technique. It's something that will work once against somebody who's never seen it before, as long as they don't outreach you by anything. Okay, then you can get away with it once. And in the context of real duels and real fighting back in the day, then that's a really useful thing to have in your bag of tricks, because if they've never seen it before and it works, they will never see it again. For what we do, it's not particularly important. It is just a little tricky exception to the general rule. But I hope that has cleared up what silver means in Brief Instructions Chapter 4, points 18 and 20.
Second from the bottom.
The Parliament shall have power to make laws with respect to copyrights, patents of inventions and designs and trademarks.
It's all part of it. This is what I'm getting at. That's my point. It's the vibe of it.
All right, taken.